Welcome to the realm of science fiction, where imagination knows no bounds and extraordinary stories unfold. Enjoy the adventure.
The line moved without sound, just the scrape of boots against metal floor and the faint hiss of recycled air. Jonah stood at the edge of it all, arms folded, stomach tight. The reparation center reeked of things scrubbed too clean bleach. Old plastic, and behind it all, the copper-sweet scent of scorched circuitry and quiet surrender. He didn't want to be here. But the system had flagged him illegible. He'd repaired enough ships, done enough colonial duty, that someone somewhere decided he deserved a reward. He glanced at the glass partition. The Trinari stood behind it tall, still beautifully. Inhuman, not machines, but trained to act like them. No words, no movement, no will. Their faces were like frozen lakes, polished, quiet, holding something cold just beneath the surface dot. And then he saw her. The curve of her shoulder caught his eye, not because it was delicate, but because she held it slightly higher than the others, like she was pretending not to be tired. Her skin shimmered faintly, gold undertones catching in the overhead light. Her hair silver with dusky violet near the roots was braided tight, ritualistically neat, but it was her stillness that undid him, not obedience. Not calm dot, it looked like grief. Rook Jonah stepped forward. His feet moved before his mind. He was handed a datasheet. Her designation blinked in neat blue letters. 7 Beta. Service ready. No violations logged. The handler unsealed the glass door, and she stepped out with exact precision. Not too fast, not too slow. Head bowed, hands at her sides. The collar at her throat blinked a passive green unlinked. UNOWNED. She stopped in front of him. Close, closer than he expected. Her gaze never rose. Her breathing didn't stir. Jonah looked at the activation band in his hand. The interface blinked, waiting. All he had to do was press his thumb. Seal her. Register the bond. Ownership by protocol. He didn't move. Instead, he stepped half a pace closer and whispered, "Hello." It wasn't loud. It wasn't a command, but her chest rose. A small inhale, barely there. No system prompted it. No instruction coded into. Her bones, just breath-sharp, sudden, like something broke loose inside her and rushed to meet the air. She blinked. Once, slowly and in that fragile space between inhale and silence, Jonah knew. She hadn't been waiting to serve. Had been waiting to be seen. The door hissed shut behind them, sealing off the hallway's noise with a final, airless sigh. Inside the processing room, the lights were too white, too flat. No shadows, no warmth. Just polished floors and walls, designed to make everything feelings, doubts, people seem small. Kael'riin dropped to her knees before he even looked at her. There was no hesitation in her motion. No flicker of emotion. She moved like gravity commanded her. Her spine stayed straight. Her hands rested lightly on her thighs, chin lowered. Collar exposed. Not submission. Just programming. Jonah didn't speak at first. He watched her, heart capping slow and loud against his ribs. She didn't tremble, didn't fidget. She simply waited. The silence pressed in, deep and sterile. He hated the way she'd been taught to disappear. He took a breath, let it fill the hollow place in his chest. Then he knelt not beside her, but near. Close enough that his voice would carry softly. Not close enough to threaten. "You don't have to kneel," he said. "Do you want to stand?" It wasn't a command, just a question. Gentle as breath. Nothing happened, then, barely perceptible. Her head twitched. A flicker. Like a nerve firing where it hadn't before. His breath caught. Her fingers shifted, one joint at a time, loosening from her thigh. A pause. A shaky inhale. And then she moved. One foot planted. The other followed. She rose slowly, like something inside her didn't quite trust gravity to allow it. Like standing was something she'd only done under orders, and this wasn't. One. A guard shifted by the door. Another straightened. Jonah didn't turn. Didn't care. She was upright now. Still silent. Still unreadable. But her hands, they trembled at her sides. He saw it then, not a flaw. Not malfunction. Awakening. Her breath came shallow. Uneven. She blinked once, and the tiniest crease formed at the corner of her mouth. Not fear. Not confusion. Just the edge of a question. He didn't reach for her. Didn't offer comfort. He let her have the moment. The space. The choice. And in that still, sterile room, Something more sacred than any command clicked into place. Not around her throat, but somewhere deeper. Somewhere neither of them could name yet, but both of them felt. The collar sat in his palm like a question. Smooth, metallic, gently pulsing its sync light, glowing with quiet authority. It was warm. Not from circuitry, but from expectation. From every step that had led to this room, this moment, this girl standing impossibly still in front of him. Seal Unit 7 Beta to primary user? The interface prompted, polite and detached. Jonah didn't answer. Didn't move. His thumb hovered. She hadn't spoken. Hadn't shifted since she stood. Like her limbs were frozen in perfect calibration. Her gaze stayed low, not in fear, but in something harder discipline. So deep, it erased the idea of rebellion before it could take shape. He watched her chest, not for signs of resistance, but for signs of life. Barely the hint of breath. Controlled, learned. She didn't know how to wait. She was waiting. He set the collar down. The sound it made against the table was soft but final, like a door, closing that no one wanted to admit had been opened. The pulse light dimmed. The air changed, just slightly. A subtle shift in pressure. Like the room had exhaled through gritted teeth. Kael'riin's breath hitched. Sharp, unfiltered. Not a system reset or reaction to code. Just breath. Jonah heard it. Felt it. Something inside her, tightly wired and obedient, had skipped a beat. Or maybe it found one. Her head didn't lift, but her stance shifted, almost imperceptibly. A flicker of weight moved from one foot to the other, a tension released where none had been allowed. "You don't need that," he said, his voice low. "Not here, not with me." She didn't answer, didn't nod, but her lips parted, not for speech, for air, for her own breath, drawn at her own pace. Then she blinked, once, and he saw it. That blink wasn't a system delay. It wasn't reactive. It wasn't a script dot, it was hers. A small, quiet rebellion. A flicker of self. She didn't look at him yet. Not fully, but Jonah understood. She had heard him. Not his words. Him. The silence had teeth. It clung to the corners of the room. Sharper, now than when they'd entered. The walls too white, too smooth, reflected the buzz of overhead lights and the faint click of a guard's shifting stance. Jonah stood still, the collar abandoned on the table behind him, forgotten in the face of what hadn't yet happened. Kael'riin hadn't moved. She stood exactly as she had a minute ago, hands still, spine perfectly aligned, eyes fixed on the floor. Like stillness itself had been coded into her bones. But then, a flicker. Her breath deepened, almost imperceptibly. A pause. Attention drawn taut for so long it barely knew how to unwind. And then slowly her chin lifted. It was not an act of defiance. Not rebellion. It was like watching someone breach the surface of a deep, still lake after being underwater too long. Her eyes rose silver blue, rimmed with soft rings of pale light. Not glowing, but reflecting something he couldn't name. Not yet. They met his. Jonah didn't speak. He didn't move. Just a soft smile, the corners of his mouth tugging upward, like a secret offered without demand. She tilted her head, uncertain. Like she couldn't figure out what she'd done wrong, or why it hadn't been punished. Her pupils widened, shoulders eased. Her next breath flowed deeper, less like protocol, more like something she had claimed. And then it happened. She took a step, just one. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But Jonah felt the room tense around it like a held breath. The two guards near the door shifted, eyes narrowing, hands twitching toward their belts. She shouldn't move. Not without being told, but she had, not because she was commanded, because she wanted to close the space between them. Jonah lifted his hands slowly, not toward her, but toward them. "She's just walking," he said, quiet and calm. "Let her." 1. Heartbeat. 2. The guards didn't move. Kael'riin stood there, barely a pace closer, eyes locked on his, still silent, still unsure. But in that stillness, Jonah felt it. Something had passed between them, not thought, not word. Just resonance, quiet and real. She hadn't asked for permission, and he hadn't needed her to. The corridor stretched quiet around them, light panels humming faintly along the ceiling, casting a sterile blue wash over the metal floor. Jonah walked, with his hands tucked into his sleeves, posture relaxed, but his pulse was restless, steady, and deep, like distant drums under skin. Beside him, Kael'riin moved in step, silent but not still. Her presence had changed since the collar was left behind. She didn't cling to shadows or stay a half step back. She walked with him, not as a shadow, but as something forming shape. They didn't speak, but it wasn't the silence of fear, doubt it. Was something deliberate, something watching itself unfold. Inside the transport shuttle, she took the seat across from him. Not diagonally, not beside, across, equal and separate. Her hands folded in her lap, fingers laced tight. She kept looking at him, not his eyes, but his mouth, as though his lips were where all the meaning lived. He spoke once, just to fill the weight between them. A soft comment about the station's cracked shuttle windows, something trivial. He smiled as he said it. She flinched. Not violently, but like something in her core had been programmed to expect laughter meant distance or danger. That emotion couldn't be gentle. "You don't have to be afraid of me," he said. Quiet, earnest. She didn't answer. Her lips moved slightly. A breath. Then she blinked and lowered her eyes. Her chest rose. Then, without command, without code, she whispered, "Am I broken?" The air in the shuttle felt thinner suddenly, like the world had pressed pause. His breath caught. Her voice had cracked. Around the word broken, not like it was a technical question, but like she wasn't sure she had the right to want more than silence. "No," he said, slowly, carefully. "I think you're waking up." Kael'riin didn't speak again, but she lifted her gaze, just enough to meet his eyes, just enough to see that he meant it. She held it there for one long heartbeat and looked away, not in shame, not in fear, just so she could feel how it had changed her. And Jonah said nothing more. He didn't need to. The rules were bending, and for the first time, he wasn't the one guiding the change. The lights were dim, low enough to make the walls fade into shadow, the kind of quiet that pressed against skin like fog. The hum of the generator outside the window gave the room a soft, steady rhythm like the heartbeat of a tired place that had forgotten how to be dangerous. Jonah lay on the couch, one arm draped over his chest, the other resting just near the edge where the blanket had started to slip. His breathing was slow, steady. He wasn't asleep, not fully, but he let his eyelids stay shut, let his body stay still. He could feel her in the doorway. Kael'riin didn't enter. Not at first. She stood like something carved out of hesitation, her silhouette backlit by the soft yellow glow from the hall. Her breath was measured impossibly even. Too even, like she didn't trust it to make noise, but her eyes moved. They traced the edge of his jaw, the faint curve where sleep softened his expression, the small twitch in his fingers, the way one foot rested slightly turned in. Human things. Vulnerable things. She didn't understand why watching him made something move inside her. Something small and warm and wrong in a way that didn't hurt. Shifted once, not enough to wake. Just a faint murmur in his throat, and the pull of his legs as he turned slightly on his side. She didn't breathe, quiet as a shadow unhooking from the wall. She stepped back, gone before the moment could. Become something else. Before she could risk staying long enough to want to, but she left something behind. Folded neatly. Placed with both hands, carefully, like it meant something. The blanket she always pretended not to notice. She didn't know why she tucked it in around him. Only that his face looked colder when it wasn't there. When morning came, the room was full of dust-speckled light. Jonah stirred, sat up slowly. No footsteps echoed. No presence lingered in the doorway. But the blanket was folded on the backrest, corners crisp, still holding the faintest scent of her cool, like wind through dusk-laced stone. Not perfume, not assigned, just hers. He touched the edge of the fabric, let his fingers rest there for a breath longer than needed. He didn't say anything about it. Just smiled, faint and quiet to himself, and made enough tea for two. The coat hung there like it always did, draped over the back of the chair beside the workbench, sleeves limp, hem stained with time. It was worn in all the places that mattered. The elbows, the collar, the fold at the shoulders where Jonah shrugged in and out of it without thought. Kael'riin stood in the doorway, silent, watching it like it might speak first. The room was empty. Jonah had stepped out moments ago, his mug half full, datapad blinking faint blue on the counter. The air still held the warmth of his breath, and something else, his scent. Earthborn. Rough edges softened by routine. Smoke, metal, old rain. She didn't mean to move. Not at first. But her feet took her closer, slow and silent. Her pulse steadied, though it didn't slow. It rarely did anymore. The coat shifted gently as she reached out. Her fingers hovered above the fabric just above the sleeve. For a moment, she hesitated, unsure why the motion felt so heavy. It was only cloth dot, but then she touched it. Only her fingertips, no pressure. A brush, nothing more. The room didn't change. But she did. Warmth pulsed up her arm, not heat, but feeling. Emotion woven through the fibers like smoke, sealed in ash. She felt tired, hopeful, alone and not alone. There was grief there, and peace, and something new growing in the spaces where silence used to live. She gasped, barely a sound, stumbled back one step like the coat had exhaled through her skin. The fabric swayed with her motion, whispering. Kael'riin stared at her hand like it had betrayed her. She didn't understand what had just happened, only that it had been real. When Jonah returned, she was sitting at the edge of the room, quiet again, her posture perfect. But something had shifted behind her eyes. They tracked him differently now. She didn't look away when he smiled. Later, after the lights had dimmed and the generator had settled into its sleep hum, she stood near the corner of the kitchen, just within the spill of light from the hall. "You smell like memory," she said softly. "Your scent. It carries thoughts." Jonah blinked. He turned to her, halfway through wiping down a mug. "What kind of thoughts?" She didn't answer, or couldn't. Instead, she stepped closer than she had the night before, close enough to feel the warmth radiate from him, close enough that he could have reached out, but did in single quotes d, thus she stayed there for a while. Neither of them spoke again, but the next day, she stood closer without hesitation, and he didn't ask why. The engine hummed low in the walls, a steady murmur that filled the silence like background breath. The lighting in the small common room was soft, an orange gold spilled from a tired lamp in the corner, pooling across the floor in uneven patches. Kael'riin sat with her back straight, legs folded beneath her, eyes watching the way Jonah's hands moved as he cleaned a corroded relay coil at the table. She didn't speak, but she was learning to observe, learning to notice the way his fingers tensed when he concentrated, the way his brow dipped when he thought no one was watching. Jonah wasn't trying to impress her. He barely remembered she was watching. He just told a joke. Something dumb, something about power converters and reverse polarity. A joke meant for himself, muttered under his breath like a habit he hadn't shaken since Earth. He didn't expect her to react, but she laughed. It broke from her suddenly sharp and light and completely unguarded. One single breath of sound. It wasn't graceful or calculated. It was human. And then she froze. Her hand went to her mouth like she just said a forbidden word in a sacred place. Her eyes widened, not in amusement, but in horror. Her body tensed, shoulders pulling tight, spine going rigid. Jonah looked up slowly, the relay in his hand forgotten. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking around the room like she expected someone to burst through the walls and strike her down. Like laughter had summoned a ghost. Kael. She didn't respond. He stood, careful, slow, took a step toward her. "You're allowed to laugh," he said gently. She shook her head, not fast, not wild. Just a small motion, like the fear was lodged in her bones. "I wasn't made for that," she whispered. Jonah knelt in front of her, just far enough not to crowd. His voice dropped, low and steady. "No one is. That's what makes it yours." She looked at him, eyes too bright in the low light, lips still parted like she might cry but didn't know how. He didn't try to make her laugh again. She didn't either, but the sound of it lingered soft and echoing, like a scent that clung to his shirt long after she left the room. He didn't name the feeling it left behind. He just sat beside her, quiet, present, and they shared the silence, like it was the most fragile thing in the world. The small room smelled faintly of ginger and steam. The kind of quiet that settled after heat had left the food, but not the air. Outside, the station's metal bones groaned softly under cooling pressure. Inside, everything else had gone still. Jonah sat cross-legged on the floor, his bowl balanced in one hand, chopsticks paused mid-air. Across from him, Kael'riin sat, motionless, back straight, gaze calm too calm. She hadn't touched the rice in her bowl in minutes. She just watched him, not his hands, not his face, his breath. She declined when he offered more, her voice barely a thread, polite but distant. He was about to change the subject, ask something, meaningless just to fill the silence, when she spoke again. "Why do you not command me?" His hand stilled mid-dash bite. The question hung between them like a crack in the air. Not sharp, just unexpected. Honest in a way that didn't sound practiced. He set the chopsticks down slowly. Because I don't want to, he said. Her expression didn't change. But something in her shoulders pulled tighter, like she was bracing for a different answer. A harsher one. But you're allowed, she said after a pause. It would be easier. He studied her. Not just the words, but the way her fingers pressed lightly into her knees. Like pressure, helped her stay grounded. Double quotes. Do you want me to? He asked. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was brittle. Fragile in the way truths are just before they shatter. Her breath came slow. Measured. I don't know what I want, she said, voice soft. But when you speak to me, it feels less like falling. The words slipped out like they weren't meant to be spoken aloud. But she didn't take them back. Jonah swallowed, unsure if it was from what she said or the knot forming low in his throat. He didn't answer right away. He didn't know how. So he reached for the salt and passed it across the space between them. Kael'riin took it. Her fingers brushed his light. Accidental, but deliberate in its stillness. Neither of them pulled away. There was something there. Something felt and unspoken. Like a hum in the blood or a current passing just beneath skin. A psychic whisper. A resonance. And in that moment, the silence between them became sacred. Not empty. Shared. The terminal screen glowed pale and cruel. In the half-dark, casting faint reflections across Jonah's glasses and the metal ridge of the desk. Outside the window, the colony's external lights flickered in slow rotation, painting long shadows across the floor. He didn't move, didn't blink. Request denied. Unit flagged. Emotional deviation, latent instability. Reassignment not authorized. Return not permitted. Classification remains. Property. The words didn't shout. They didn't have to. They just sat there, flat and final. The way only bureaucracy could be mechanically brutal. His thumb hovered above the reply field, but there was nothing to type that didn't feel like giving up. Behind him, the floor creaked barely. He hadn't heard her enter. She didn't speak at first, but he felt her there, like a presence moving. Softly through the air, like warmth in a place the heating never reached. She stood close enough that the scent of her, something like rain and stone and wild things, held too long in cages, drifted to the edge of his senses. She wasn't supposed to read English, but her eyes were on the screen, and he felt her understand it anyway. You tried to give me back? Her voice was low, not accusatory, just hollow. He turned slowly. The guilt was already there, thick behind his ribs, before he met her gaze. She looked at him as if trying to balance too many things at once: confusion, fear, disappointment, hope. I tried to give you a choice, he said, quietly. She blinked. Just once. Her hands were at her sides, not clenched, but not loose either. A stillness shaped by too many years of waiting for orders. When she stepped forward, it wasn't mechanical. Her movements were light, almost hesitant. She stopped just short of him. You are the first command I wanted to obey, she said. The words landed in his chest like something soft dropped from high above. Gentle, but with weight. He didn't know if it was honor that flared up inside him or something closer to fear, because there was no clear line between what she chose and what she was still learning she could choose. He didn't speak. He only watched as she turned and left the room. That night, he set the table for two. No command. No invitation. The second plate sat in quiet weight across from his, steam curling into the air. Kael'riin entered the room, paused, then walked over and sat. Not because he asked, not because she was told, because she wanted to. He didn't smile, didn't speak. He passed her the salt. She took it. Their fingers brushed again, and this time, her breath caught just slightly, like the feeling was beginning to belong to her. The sun lamps overhead cast a warm, drowsy glow across the small cabin, painting soft gold on the metal fixtures and smudged corners of the room. The scent of warming noodles curled through the air, laced with traces of old solder and fresh herbs from the planter box Jonah had stubbornly coaxed to life beside the vent. Kael'riin stood at the counter, focused but slow, hands moving with practiced precision as she sliced vegetables. The knife in her grip was familiar now, chosen, not issued. Jonah leaned against the wall just behind her, arms crossed, voice quiet as breath. Kael, can you pass me the bowl? She paused. Her fingers stopped mid-slice, blade hovering over. A half-cut stalk. Her eyes flicked sideways, Not at the bowl, but at him. "You've said it again," she murmured. He tilted his head. "Said what?" "My name," she said. "Not the full designation. Just Kael." He blinked, then nodded. "Yeah, it fits you better." Her chest rose barely a shift, but not routine. Not regulation breath. Something deeper. "Say it." "Again," she whispered. Jonah's lips parted, the word gentle as it left. "Kael." She turned to him fully now, eyes wide but not uncertain. Her hands were still stained green from the stalks, her knuckles faintly dusted in seasoning, but she didn't care. Her mouth moved silently for a moment, and then she said it herself. "Kael." He smiled, and something flickered in her chest. Not a thought, not logic, not reflex. Recognition. Not who she had been made to be, who she might be becoming. Later, when the lights dimmed and the quiet of station night settled over them, Jonah laid out the blanket on the couch like always. His datapad glowed faintly in his lap, though he wasn't reading. He was just breathing, listening to the soft hum of the vent and the fainter sound of her movements down the hall. Then, pause. The sound of her mat being dragged, not loudly, but not in secret either. The faint scrape of it shifting across the floor. Not to the wall. Not to the corner. Closer. She didn't lie beside him. Just near. Close enough that, in the quiet, their breaths could meet in the space between. She lay still. Not waiting, just present. And Jonah didn't say her name again, because she had already claimed it. The lights in the kitchen were dim, casting long shadows that bled into the corners. Steam from the pot rose in soft curls, warm and fragrant, wrapping the small space in the scent of cumin, onion, and something floral she could never name. Kael'riin stood beside the counter, her hand hovering near the tin of spice he'd shown. Her earlier, the one with the copper lid and worn label. The one he always reached for when he wasn't thinking. She moved to pick it up. So did he. Their fingers touched. Not hard, not fast. Just the pads of skin grazing together at the rim of the tin, soft and accidental. A blink's worth of contact, but she froze. Her breath hitched, not sharp, not frightened. Just shallow, like she'd stepped into a different kind of air. Jonah didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He just let it be. His hand stayed beneath hers. Their fingers rested together. A second passed. Maybe two. Longer than it should have been, not long enough to satisfy whatever was trembling beneath her skin. The warmth of his palm led into her like a slow pulse. Not heat invitation. She blinked once. The air shifted, not in temperature, but in weight. Something unseen pressed in. A thrum at the back of her neck, the edges of her thoughts. It wasn't psychic in the way the implants once fed commands. It was older than that, quieter, like the ghost of a song she had once known before she was. Born into silence, Jonah's breath was steady, even. He glanced down and up, meeting her gaze with the gentlest question in his eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Her hand twitched, just slightly, but didn't leave his. She looked. Up. His eyes were kind. Not soft, safe, and something inside her stirred. Something that hadn't moved in years. Something engineered to be obedient, efficient, silent. It ached, not for freedom, for closeness. She didn't step forward, but she didn't step back either. Tin clinked quietly as he passed it to her, his fingers brushing hers one last time. That touch lingered, not in skin, but in thought. Like the heat of breath against a cheek never touched. Like the space where longing lives before it learns how to speak. Neither of them mentioned it, but when she stirred the pot, her hands trembled. Just enough for her to notice. Just enough for him to pretend not to. And the kitchen felt smaller. Somehow. Not because the walls closed in, because something between them had just taken shape. The room was dim but warm, lit only by the flickering glow of the projector screen, casting pale shadows across the floor. Jonah sat cross-legged on the rug, arms resting over his knees, a half-finished mug of something sweet and spiced cooling beside him. The old Earth film played on the wall, a flickering, grainy thing with exaggerated expressions and ill-timed. Sound, a comedy from a time when laughter had been simple and unguarded. Kael'riin sat beside him, upright and still, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't lean, didn't slouch, but her eyes tracked every motion on the screen, each ridiculous tumble and outburst, like it was a ritual she was trying to understand. Her breath stayed even, her posture perfect. Jonah laughed once quietly, more at her silence than the clumsy joke on screen. He didn't expect her to join him. He wasn't trying to make her, but then the scene shifted, A man slipped on a ladder, landed in a bucket, and flung an entire cake into the air with a cry that echoed through the room like theater. It was so absurd, so over the top, that it broke. Something. Kael'riin laughed. It wasn't restrained. It wasn't shaped. It escaped her. Sharp, clear, musical. And instantly, she froze. Her hands flew to her mouth like she'd just spilled something sacred. Her eyes widened, darting to Jonah, searching for judgment, punishment, correction. Jonah didn't speak right away. He didn't laugh in return. He just looked at her soft, steady, and smiled. "You have a beautiful laugh," he said. Her breath hitched. Her hands stayed where they were for a moment longer, as if letting them fall would make it real. Slowly, hesitantly, she lowered them. "That wasn't meant to happen," she whispered. "It was supposed to," he replied. "You were supposed to be free enough to laugh." Her gaze lingered on him, uncertain, like she wasn't sure if what he'd said was truth or kindness wearing a mask. She didn't answer. The screen shifted. Scenes again. Another mess. Another old world joke. And this time, before the punchline even landed, she smiled. Not because she was supposed to, because she wanted to. And Jonah didn't say a word. He just sat beside her in the dark, grateful that the silence between them no longer needed to be so quiet. The tool slipped. Just a hair of a second, then pain. Sharp, clean. Jonah sucked in a breath and jerked his hand back, already reaching for the stained cloth he kept nearby. Copper scent curled into the air, fresh and unmistakable. He muttered under his breath. But the sound of footsteps cut through the moment like lightning. Kael, single quotes RI in dot. She wasn't walking. She was moving too fast, fluid, precise, like her body had bypassed permission. She dropped to her knees beside him, the hem of her tunic brushing the floor, her breath already quickened. Her hands hovered over his, fingers twitching but not yet touching. "You are hurt," she said. Jonah blinked. "It's just," he began, but his words caught. Her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that rooted him in place. Wide, alert, her pupils dilated to near black. Not fear, not pain, something deeper, something primal. Her breath shuddered, like it didn't know whether to stop or start again. She reached forward slowly. Her fingertips came just close enough to graze the back of his palm. Not a full touch, just pressure enough to send a whisper down his spine. It wasn't pain. It was vibration. A resonance that hummed from her skin into his nerves, soft and low like a forgotten song. He felt it there, in his bones. Not a physical sensation, but emotional recognition. A thread between them pulled taut. He looked up, stunned. "You felt it?" he whispered. She nodded. "Just once." Her voice barely rose above a breath. "I don't know how, but I did." Her hand hovered again, this time moving over the cut. No medical scanner. No antiseptic. Just her presence close, focused. She wasn't trying to fix him. She was trying to understand what this meant. He watched her shoulders rise and fall, slow then faster. She wasn't supposed to do this. No protocol said she should feel someone else's pain. No command told her to care. And yet here she was, hands trembling, body too close, eyes not blinking. Jonah exhaled, not from relief, but awe. "It's okay," he murmured, but it WSN single quotes T. Not really. It was something else. Something sacred. She didn't speak again. She didn't need to. Her fingers remained above his skin, tracing the air with invisible threads. The hum between them faded slowly. And still neither moved. Neither looked away. He was bleeding. And for the first time since she'd stepped into his life, maybe for the first time in hers, she felt it like it was her own. The room was quiet, except for the soft flick of digital pages turning. The old tablet screen glowed faintly in the dim evening light, washing Kael'riin's features in a pale blue. Her legs were folded beneath her on the floor, spine straight, hands resting lightly on her lap. Jonah stood in the doorway, unnoticed. For a moment, he didn't speak. She was reading. Really reading. Not scanning symbols. Not practicing phonetics. Reading. "I thought you didn't like that interface," he said softly. She looked up without surprise, eyes reflecting both the glow of the tablet and something else. Maybe. "Will, it's not pleasant," she replied. "But the words, they feel like edges." "I wanted to know what cut." He smiled faintly. "And did they?" "No." She tilted her head. "They stitched." Some words feel like stitching. Jonah moved to sit beside her, close but not crowding. Her scent was faint today tea leaves, sun-warm linen, the memory of rain. Familiar and startling. What were you reading? He asked. She turned the tablet toward him. A short story collection. One she hadn't been assigned. I wanted to choose something, she said. And this had a cover that made me feel something I couldn't explain. That's usually the good stuff, Jonah sighed. Kael'riin hesitated. What is your favorite? My favorite? She pointed to 2 music files on the tablet. Classical. Electronic. He laughed. Depends on the mood, I guess. Her brows knit. That isn't choosing. That's reacting. Jonah leaned back, chuckling. Then maybe you should teach me how it's done. Later, in the marketplace, he handed her a small bottle. Tea or juice? She didn't answer right away. The hum of vendors, the scent of baked root fruit and metal wiring filled the air. She looked down at the 2 options. I want tea, she said at last. Voice steady. He blinked. Yeah? Because it's yours, she added. Jonah's hand froze. The bottle still rested in his palm, cool with condensation. When he turned to her, she was already looking at him, not shy, not waiting for permission. Her eyes didn't dart away. You just chose, he said. I did, she whispered. You're the reason I know how. He didn't speak right away. The moment stretched between them, quiet, fragile, radiant. He could feel the distance she didn't close, the breath she didn't hold. And still, she stood close. He stepped. Nearer. She didn't move away. Her shoulder brushed his, the fabric of her tunic soft against the canvas of his jacket. No fire, no sudden gasp, just warmth, an acknowledgement. Her skin didn't flinch. Her gaze didn't falter. She stood in that closeness like she'd earned it, like she chose it. And Jonah, heart beating low and slow like distant thunder, didn't move either. Not yet. Not away. The room held its breath. A low hum pulsed through the outer walls of the station ventilation systems, power conduits, the size of artificial gravity, flexing across alloy and void. Jonah stirred under the blanket. Warmth wrapped loosely around his frame. Something different. Not sound, not light, just the unmistakable pressure of presence. He opened his eyes slowly. She was there, sitting on the floor beside his bed, her arms wrapped loosely around her knees, spine straight but not rigid. Her hair shimmered faintly in the dim glow of the monitor light. She didn't flinch when he turned his head toward her, didn't pretend she hadn't been watching, just held his gaze with quiet intensity, as if the sound of his breath were a secret rhythm she was memorizing. He swallowed, voice dry. You okay? She nodded once. A small motion, almost reverent. Then, softer than the whisper of cloth. Your breathing is calm. I wanted to feel it. Jonah didn't know what to say to that. His lips parted slightly, but no answer came. Because what could he offer in return? Permission? Explanation? None of it would have been the truth. She wasn't there because she had to be, and he wasn't sending her away. He shifted slightly under the blanket, not to put distance between them, but to make space for her nearness. His limbs were heavy, sleep still clinging to his skin, but something in his chest fluttered with weightless warmth. She didn't move closer, didn't speak again, but her gaze stayed with him, eyes tracing the soft rise and fall of his chest. There was nothing clinical in it, nothing detached. It was curiosity, woven with something gentler, something unnameable. She was listening, not to him, but for him. He could feel it. The pulse between them didn't need words. It lived in the hush between exhales, in the shared silence, thick with trust neither had dared to name. His eyelids drooped again. The safety of her presence drew sleep like gravity. As his consciousness slipped, one final thought clung to him, not spoken, just felt. She was there because she chose to be. And that mattered more than touch. Morning came soft and gray through the station's filtered viewport. The hum of the corridor returned, distant footsteps echoing like ghosts. Jonah stirred. She hadn't moved, still sitting, still watching. But her eyes were closed now, chin resting lightly on her knees. Breathing, slow, matching his. Like a harmony neither of them had needed to practice. He didn't wake her. He just watched her, like she had watched him. And in the quiet between them, something fragile and luminous bloomed. Not command, ritual. Just the weightless certainty of being near and being allowed to stay. The door wasn't shut. Just slightly open an inch, maybe two enough for the early wind to slip through, like a held breath finally released. It stirred the edge of a paper on the table, lifted the fringe of an old drape by the window, brushed along his skin with the faintest chill. Jonah stepped inside, slow and silent, like the wrong sound might undo something sacred. The coat still hung on the back of the chair, the one she always touched, fingertips brushing the warm collar like it held a memory she couldn't name. The chipped teacup sat where she'd left it yesterday, half full, steam long gone. The rim smudged faintly where her mouth had been, but the room didn't feel full anymore. There was no presence at the edge of his senses. No weightless awareness hovering just behind him. No silent attention shaped like her, echoing beneath the floorboards and lights. Just air now. Still, emptied. Cold Dot, his eyes scanned the room like they might catch her retreating shadow. They didn't. Then he saw it. The collar. Resting gently on the workbench, its interface dark, the security band unclasped. Beside it, the old music player he'd restored a few weeks ago. It hadn't played in years, until she asked what the buttons meant. They'd listened to old earth sounds for hours, not speaking. Just breathing. Just near Dot now, it sat quiet, waiting, as if it too had lost something it couldn't name. And between them, a small folded note. Shaky writing. The angles sharp, like she didn't quite understand how to hold the pen. He reached for it slowly, hands trembling in a way they hadn't. Since deployment days. I was not made for freedom, the note read. But I remembered what it tasted like. Thank you. He didn't sit, he collapsed. Onto the bench, into the moment, into the hollow she left behind. His hands closed around the note, like it might vanish, like maybe she'd still feel the warmth of his grip wherever she'd gone. His throat ached. No tears yet, just tightness, just silence. The music player crackled. A broken sound, 1 second of static, then silence again. He stared at it, wondering if it had meant to say something. Or maybe the room just missed her too. The wind moved again. It circled the space like a question unanswered. Lifted the corner of the note. Whispered through the half-open door, like she'd taken the last of the breath with her. Jonah didn't. Close it. Didn't move the collar. Didn't press play. He just sat there. One palm flat against the cool surface of the bench, as if trying to feel the shape of her last decision. She was gone, but not lost. He had taught her how to choose. And in the end, she'd chosen the sky. The rain hit the roof like distant artillery, steady, rhythmic, too precise to be natural. Thunder followed like boots on metal floors. Jonah didn't flinch. He just stared at the blinking message on the screen, unmoving, eyes dry and burning. Subject 7 beta retrieved. Neural integrity compromised. Servitude deviation confirmed. Reset scheduled. Reset. Not discipline. Not reassignment. Just ... Erasure. Like a program with a memory leak. Like she was a problem to debug. They'd called her contaminated. Said she'd begun to bond dangerously. A phrase that made Jonah's hands curl into fists so tight his nails cut crescent moons into his palms. She hadn't been a danger. She'd been real. He stood up slowly, the chair scraping across the floor. With a groan. The kind of sound that felt too loud in a room so full of absence. Everything looked the same, unchanged, untouched, but the quiet was wrong now. Too hollow. Like the shape of her had been removed from the air. His coat still hung on the hook. By the door. He hadn't worn it since she left. Jonah reached for it, fingers trembling before they even made contact. As he gripped the collar, the fabric gave slightly beneath his hand-soft, worn in. And then her scent. He hadn't expected it to still be there. Not floral. Not artificial. Just her. A warmth in the weave. A trace of breath. Of presence. Something human or something trying to be. He pressed it to his face without thinking. Not for comfort. For memory. It wasn't enough. But it was all he had. His eyes squeezed shut. The scent filled his lungs, gentle as a whisper. It wasn't strong, but it clung like she had clung to the edge of his voice. Every time he said her name softer than orders required. Kael. Unit. Not beta. Just Kael. The coat smelled like the moment she'd leaned against the doorframe and asked awkwardly, "Do humans always hum when cooking?" Like the moment she stood too close and didn't step back. Like the silence she chose to keep. Beside his bed, instead of sleeping in the room down the hall. His chest ached, a slow tightening behind the ribs. He didn't cry. Couldn't. The tears were trapped somewhere between rage and something that felt too close to love. She wasn't defective. She had felt. She had laughed. She had chosen T because it was his dot. She had watched him sleep and listened to his breath like it meant something holy. How dare they try to delete that? How dare they call her dangerous for being alive in the wrong way? He lowered the coat, fingers clenched in the fabric. Dot outside. Lightning flashed. It lit up the sky like a signal flare. No one would answer. Dot inside. Jonah stood alone, but not empty. They could wipe her memories, reformat her code, but they couldn't undo what she'd learned here, couldn't touch what she became. And they couldn't erase his memory of her. Dot, not her voice quiet, unsure, but hers, not the feel of her fingers brushing his for no reason at all. Dot, not the echo she left in every corner of this place. They could reset the subject, but they couldn't unmake. Kael. Jonah took a breath. It shook. Dot, then another. Deeper. Dot, he didn't know what he'd do yet, but he knew one thing with absolute, thunderous certainty: she was real. And if they thought they could bury that with a data wipe. They didn't understand what humans did for the people they loved. The mug on the table still had a faint print and arc of her thumb, smudged just so, like she'd turned it absent-mindedly while thinking. Jonah didn't wipe it away. Couldn't. His fingers hovered near the ceramic, then withdrew, like the heat of her still lingered in the clay. The room wasn't empty. Dot, it was haunted. Dot, not with horror, not with grief, but with memory, the kind that lingered like a song half heard. In a dream, looping just beneath consciousness. Dot, in the kitchen, he still expected the soft hum she used to mimic from him. She never sang, not in the way humans did, but her throat would vibrate faintly when she thought he wasn't listening. A low, curious buzz, like she was trying to remember what happiness sounded like. She never used words she didn't mean, never said anything to fill the air. But sometimes, when she walked past him and thought he wasn't paying attention, she sighed exactly like he did. Not by accident. Dot, by study. Dot, as if trying to learn his sorrow in order to understand her own. The hallway was quieter now, too still. He used to bump into her, there reaching for a book on the shelf she could almost, but not quite, touch. She never asked for help. She just reached. And he always noticed. Dot, now, when he passed that shelf, he reached for it too. Not the book. Just the moment. Dot, in the workshop, the wires still tangled where she'd left them. Her tools sat in the exact arrangement she preferred, edges perfectly aligned, points all facing east, because she said east felt calm. He hadn't known what that meant. Still didn't, but he'd started organizing his own tools that way. He sat down at the bench and found her name scratched into the underside of a datapad. Kael, not her designation, not the alphanumerical label burned into her registry file. Just Kael. He stared at it, throat tight. That was the name she let him say, soft and slow, like something precious and private. She didn't correct him. She chose it. Dot, his journal lay open beside him. He flipped through it with fingers that hesitated at each page, as though afraid of touching the past too quickly. And then he found it. A line he'd written in the dark, when her breath was still within reach, when sleep had come slow because her warmth was too near. She doesn't obey. She chooses. He stared at the words, traced them with the tip of his index finger. The ink had bled slightly. The paper had creased. It looked like a wound that hadn't healed right. Dot, then unbidden, uninvited, a whisper returned to him. Dot, soft, fragile, utterly hers. If they take me, follow the scent of saffron and salt. That's where I used to dream. He didn't know if she meant it literally. Maybe it was just a metaphor, something poetic from a half-human heart, but he could still hear it. The way her voice shook slightly, like she hadn't meant to say it out loud, like it had slipped through a crack in the dam she built daily. Saffron and salt. Jonah stood. The journal fell closed behind him, spine cracking with the finality of decision. He went to the door, coat in hand, hers, not his. He inhaled once, slow. Dot, not perfume, not synthetics. Just warmth. Just her. He didn't know where saffron and salt might take him, but he'd follow, even if it meant chasing ghosts across starlit dunes or forgotten colonies, because she hadn't just taught him about freedom. She'd taught him how to look for her. The heat pressed down like a waiting hand, thick with midday stillness and the quiet hum of dock machinery. Jonah moved past it all, without seeing containers, traders, the rhythmic clank of ships refueling. None of it mattered. He was following a ghost, or maybe a thread, something fine as breath and 10 times more stubborn. Saffron, salt. The scent came first in memory, not air. The memory of her Kael lingering just past the edge of vision, a sound she used to hum, a look she gave when she didn't understand a joke, but still wanted to be near the sound of his laughter. His feet carried him beyond the freight sector, toward the older loading corridors, where no one lingered. Paint peeled from the walls. Shadows sat longer than they should. Then came the scent reel, this time not warm, sharp, like late evening sun over a dry sea, or the back of her hand after a night spent watching stars. It shouldn't have been possible. Not here, not this long after, but it was. He slowed. The hallway narrowed. The scent strengthened. A spice vendor stood idle at the end, half asleep in the heat. No customers. Just crates of forgotten import sacks. Of crushed turmeric, dried limes, bitter herbs with names Jonah couldn't pronounce. And behind it, hidden in plain silence, an old service gate. Metal, sun-bleached. Abandoned. Except. His chest tightened. The scent lived here. Not just saffron, not just salt. Or. He stepped forward, slowly, as if the air might collapse under his weight. His hand reached out, not shaking, but not steady either. He pressed his palm to the center of the door. Fingers splayed like memory, heated anchoring. Cold metal met warm skin. A shiver chased up his spine, not from fear, from certainty. This was it. She had passed here, recently, deliberately, his breath stilled. The smell wrapped around him, like a voice trying to form in the dark. No trail of footprints. No signal. No digital tag. Just this. A map she made for him alone. He didn't call out. Didn't knock. He simply closed his eyes, leaning in until his forehead touched the door. Please be safe. The silence didn't answer. But the scent did. It didn't fade. Didn't waver. It lingered, as if waiting to be followed. Jonah let his fingers trace the seam of the door. Not pushing, not forcing. Just remembering. If they take me, she had whispered once. Follow. The scent of saffron and salt. That's where I used to dream. He swallowed hard. The ache in his throat had nothing to do with words. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was a message. She hadn't run. She had led. And now he was standing at the beginning of wherever she needed him to go. The corridor curved like a question he didn't want answered. Every door the same. Every wall too smooth, too clean. The kind of silence that didn't mean peace, it meant control. Jonah's ID flickered green at the final lock. The door hissed open. The light hit him first. Artificial and cold, humming in tones just above hearing. It felt like stepping into someone else's dream. A dream scrubbed, sterile, erased. She was there, suspended in the center of the chamber. Not lying down, not standing, floating, as if gravity had given up on her. As if time had. Kael. Her hair drifted like seagrass in still water. Her hands hung open. Wires pulsed faintly in the sockets at her collarbone. Thin tubes led into the base of her neck, feeding data or drugs or both. He wanted to look away. He couldn't. She looked peaceful. But it wasn't peace. It was absence. As if something had been turned down until only her shell remained. Jonah stepped forward. The glass separating them was thick, etched with diagnostic overlays. It buzzed, faintly when he touched it. But he didn't care. Kael, he whispered. No answer. He pressed his palm flat, fingers SPLAYED. Her name sat on his tongue again, barely breath this time. Kael. And something happened. It was small. So small, he almost missed it. The heart monitor, a faint line that had been flat for seconds, jumped. Just once. A single spike, then stillness again. But he had seen it. Felt it. Not reflex. Not malfunction. It was recognition. Like her soul, wherever they'd hidden it, had tried to sit up and whisper back. He leaned his forehead against the glass. His breath fogged it in a trembling arc. Inside, she didn't move. But the dream she floated in shifted. Just a little, and he remembered. She had told him once, curled beside the old heater in their quarters, her voice soft with wonder. Humans dream with fire. Ours is colder. But I think I caught yours. I think it stayed. He didn't realize. He was crying until the warmth slid past his nose. You caught it, he said aloud. And I'm not leaving it here. His fingers curled against the glass, not with desperation, but with promise. Because this wasn't just about rescue. This wasn't pity. This was a bond born before either of them understood what it meant. Kael wasn't built to dream. She wasn't built to feel, but she had. And in doing so, She'd taught him how to hope in ways he'd forgotten were possible. He reached into his coat, pulled out the old music player he'd fixed for her. The one she said made her feel like she was breathing in a new color. It still worked. Barely. He placed it against the glass and hit play. A low, humming note filled the chamber. Soft, earthborn, a lullaby from before the war. Inside the tank, a ripple passed through her fingers. Not from the fluid. From her. Jonah smiled, lips tight with held-back sobs. I found the end of your trail, Kael. Now I'm lighting one back. Behind him, the corridor lights dimmed for shift change. But in that room cut off from mercy, from rules, from names, the fire stayed. The control panel blinked steadily, indifferent to his panic. Code required. Emergency protocol engaged. Jonah's hand hovered over the input keys. Blood from a jaw. Scraped knuckle dripping slowly onto the floor dot. His pulse was too loud. The room too bright. She was behind the glass Kael, floating, still unmoving in that cruel cradle of sedation. One code was his, issued when he first stepped onto this base. The second wasn't. He stared at the blinking cursor. And then, softly he whispered it. Kael'riin. Assistant chirped. Accepted. And something in him cracked. Not from relief, from awe. From the terrifying, breathless ache of knowing a machine built to strip her name had just accepted the one. He gave back to her, a hiss. The seal disengaged. Siren screamed to life. Red lights strobed across the room, bouncing shadows over the tank, the walls, his face. It looked like blood. It felt like judgment. But he didn't stop. He sprinted to the chamber, hands shaking, and opened it. Her body slumped forward, too limp, too pale, but caught before it hit the floor. She fell into him with the softness of surrender, her hair damp against his throat, her skin shockingly cold. But her fingers her fingers curled into his shirt like memory, like instinct, like she knew, even now, that he was safe. Kael. He breathed. Not a password this time. A prayer dot, no response. Just the rise and fall of her chest, aligning slowly with his, as if her lungs needed his rhythm to remember how to move. He didn't wait. One arm behind her knees, the other around her back. He carried her out. The hall outside blared warnings in 6 languages, but none loud enough to drown out the roar in his chest. Every step echoed like a sentence, being carved. Banishment, imprisonment, treason. But her weight in his arms was real. More real than the law. More real than the title he once wore. Down the corridor. Around the corner. Past the first checkpoint guardless. Panic had scattered protocol like leaves in wind. And still her hand clung to him, not for safety. For him. He paused once, breath. Ragged, heart hammering like distant engines. She shifted faintly, forehead resting near his collar. And then a whisper. So faint he thought it might be imagined. Jonah. It wasn't full. Not firm, but it was there. Her voice. He swallowed. Hard, throat burning. I've got you. A lie. Or maybe a promise. Another turn. Another hallway. An emergency exit loomed ahead, sealed but hackable. He knew the code. He'd watched them install it weeks ago, never knowing why he memorized it. Until now. Beep, beep. Click. The door opened. Cool air swept over them like absolution. Still, he didn't run. Not now. Not when the world behind them had collapsed and the world ahead hadn't yet begun. He looked down at her. Hair like copper mist. Lips parted. Brow furrowed faintly in sleep. She wasn't property. She wasn't defective. She was Kael. And if the law couldn't see that, then the law didn't deserve her. He walked forward, not fast, but steady. The kind of step you take when you're no longer escaping. You're choosing. They would come for him. He knew that. With chains and questions and all the righteous fury bureaucracy could craft. But she had chosen him first. And now, he would burn every rule down before he'd let her be caged again. Her hand twitched, just slightly. He tightened his grip. No matter what came next, he wasn't letting go. The room buzzed with quiet precision, a rhythm of machines tending to their task. Every hum, every soft blink of status lights carried the sterile indifference of technology. Meant to erase, she lay there, still, suspended in a sleep not earned but enforced. Her body too still, her chest rising only because wires said it should. They'd folded her hands neatly, as if tidiness made it less cruel. Jonah stood in the threshold for too long, afraid his presence would change nothing. A technician brushed past him, gesturing to her behind the glass. Almost pretty when they shut up, huh? Jonah's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Didn't trust his voice not to crack. He stepped closer into the isolation zone. The glass door hissed shut. Behind him, the room was colder here. Too bright. Like emotion wasn't allowed past the threshold, Kael lay cradled in the arc of synthetic light. Her lashes were dark against skin pale from sedation. Her hair fanned out over the sterile pillow like spilled copper. She looked peaceful, but he'd seen her peaceful. That wasn't it. This was hollow. He stared at the interface. The neural sync displayed normal rhythm. Theta pulses. Controlled rest. He stepped nearer. One breath. Then another. The air felt ... tight, like the room was holding its breath with him. His fingertips hovered over the edge of the medical cradle. He didn't touch. Not yet ... Then softly, barely more than air, he whispered. Kael. Nothing moved. No spike. In the monitors. No change in the home. But he felt something. A stillness that wasn't quite still. A hesitation in the silence. As if the machines had heard and weren't sure whether to answer. He leaned closer, his voice shaking but steady. Kael'riin. A soft breath escaped her lips. Barely audible. Then a flicker. Her eyelids trembled. Not a twitch. A struggle. Jonah's heart thundered like distant engines, waking from STA's ice dot. She stirred again, more than before. Her fingers twitched once, curling faintly toward her chest. A mechanical alert began to pulse on the panel. Confused, he bent down, face closer now. It's me. Jonah. I'm here. Her brows tightened faintly, like chasing a dream's thread, and then her lips parted. Jonah. His name, not assigned, not prompted, just spoken, like memory cracking the surface. I dreamt. The words were fragile, carried no strength, but they landed like gravity in his chest. He reached for her hand lightly, gently, and this time, he didn't care about the alarms, or the laws, or the technician watching from behind the glass. Her skin was warm now. Barely, but not because of the machines. Her hand turned in his. Not command. Not reflex. Choice. I know, he whispered, voice raw. So did I. The lights didn't flicker. The sirens didn't blare. But something had changed. The room wasn't empty anymore. He stayed beside her, hand in hand, until the monitors recalibrated her rhythms. Until her breathing found his again. Because what she said wasn't code. It was memory. That made it real. The sync leads detached with a quiet hiss. Jonah's fingers trembled not from panic, but from something. Deeper, almost sacred. Reverence, maybe. Or something that didn't have a name in any human or Trinari dialect. She swayed forward as the support systems shut down. A marionette freed all at once. He caught her. The moment her weight folded into him, his heart stuttered. Not because she was heavy, but because she was real. Solid, warm, even in her stillness. Her breath ghosted across his collarbone. Thin, fragile, but there. Stay with me? He breathed, forehead pressing lightly to hers. She didn't answer. Not with words, but her fingers moved slow and unsteady and curled near his chest. Not grasping at air. Not flailing from sedation. No, the motion was toward him. Intentional. Instinctive. He froze. Every culture had its taboos. Every species its sacred symbols. For the Trinari, touch was declaration raw and binding. You did not reach without choosing. Even like this, half lost in chemical sleep, her body knew what it wanted. And it was him. Jonah couldn't breathe for a second. That wasn't obedience. It wasn't programming or imprint. It was will fierce and quiet and unscripted. The hum of alarms pressed harder now, louder beyond the reinforced walls. Footsteps echoed, metallic and sharp. The guards would come soon. He looked down at her again. Her lashes flickered. Not fully open, but enough. Just enough. Kael, he whispered. No change. But her hand didn't let go. The sirens howled behind. Him as he lifted her, slow and careful, like he was carrying something ancient and breakable. She didn't stir, but her breath steadied. Each inhale falling into rhythm with his, like she'd found the tether in the storm and wasn't letting go. Metal doors slid open at his approach, red lights strobing across his path. The colony's emergency lockdown hadn't activated in time. World screamed at him to turn back, but he kept walking. Each step was a prayer, a promise. She was drenched in silence, still half trapped in that blank suspension where they tried to bury her mind, but her fingers had chosen him. Without ceremony, without instruction. Just memory, muscle, and something deeper than logic. A bond sealed in defiance. He held her. Closer. Whispered nothing. Just breathed with her dot and walked through steel and sirens into whatever waited beyond the gate. The alarms weren't sounds anymore. They were sensations, sharp pulses in Jonah's chest, echoing through his ribs, like someone banging on a door from inside. Red lights strobed across the corridor walls, casting the world in frantic flashes, but his steps didn't falter. He didn't run. He moved with purpose. Like gravity had shifted its pull, and she, soft and silent in his arms, was the center of it. Kael'riin's weight was real, not burdensome, but anchoring. Her breath brushed his neck in shallow, fragile rhythms, each one tethering him more tightly to something he hadn't dared name. Ahead, the corridor forked. Shouts rang out to the left, sharp boots, panicked radio static. He turned right into a shadowed maintenance shaft, sealed with a lock only engineers bothered to learn. His fingers moved on instinct, punching in codes he hadn't used in months. The door hissed open. Cold air swept over him like breath from a distant world. She stirred, not fully. Just a small shift her forehead, brushing his collarbone. Her lips parting with a sound too soft to be language. It wasn't Trinari. It wasn't English. It was something between something hers. His arms tightened around her, as if he could shield her from time itself. But it wasn't fear that filled his chest. It was awe. She pressed closer. A barely there motion, but deliberate. The fabric of his shirt grew damp where her skin touched, from fluid or tears. He didn't know. Her breath caught once, then steadied, not sensed to panic. Sensed to him. And in that silence between alarms, something passed through them. Not a thought, not speech, just a knowing. A wordless message that lived under the skin. She had woken. And it was for him. He kept walking. Not fast. Not reckless. Just forward through bulkheads and emergency lights, past frightened personnel who barely registered him, as if his quiet resolve rewrote their orders. They reached the final stairwell, narrow and half-lit, vibrating with distant energy. Above them, the exit to the launch corridor. And beyond that, the jump gate. He climbed slowly, her weight still against him, head resting where it could hear the heartbeat he didn't know he was giving away. She whispered again, a single syllable. He didn't recognize it, but it curled through his spine like warm static, and he knew it meant safe. He answered with silence, just a breath drawn through his nose and exhaled through parted lips, the way she once did when watching the sky. From the workshop. They reached the top. The blast door loomed. Blue light seeped in from the far end, flickering with the unstable edges of the jump gate. Beyond that, stars, chaos, maybe death, but also freedom. A low rumble rolled through the station as the gate activated. Wind whipped down the tunnel like the sigh of a giant. Jonah paused just before the threshold. Her hand moved, slower than instinct. Her fingers brushed his chest, over his heart. He stopped breathing. She didn't speak, but her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, and found him. He bent his head slightly. "We go together," he said. Her lips didn't form a reply, but her fingers curled into his shirt again. And when he stepped into the blue fire, it felt less like escape and more like orbit, not pulled by duty, not by design. But by something older, chosen, and gravity never looked back. The gate chamber trembled, wind curling through the broken seal like breath stolen from the stars. Lights above them flickered, casting bursts of pale blue across the metal walls, like moonlight on water. Somewhere behind them, alarms still screamed, but they were distant, now less urgent, less real. Jonah knelt slowly, one arm beneath her shoulders, the other cradling her knees. His hands moved carefully, reverently, as if afraid she might shatter. Her skin was cool against his palms, but the faint warmth of her breath brushed his neck, real and fragile. He laid her gently on the padded floor near the blast doors. Blue light danced across her face. Her eyes fluttered open. And this time she didn't look through him. She looked at him. Really saw him, the way a blind person might feel sunlight for the first time, not just the light, but the shape of it. The shape he made in her world. "I was made to serve," she said. Her voice rasped like something raw and newly formed. "But you never asked me to." He didn't know what to say. His throat tightened. His heartbeat thundered like distant engines, each pulse loud enough to count time by. She reached. For him, her hand was slow, trembling but steady with will. She touched his jaw, thumb brushing the edge of his stubble like she was memorizing texture. Not as command, not as duty dot, and then she leaned in. Not bold, not choreographed. Her lips hesitated an inch from his, as if asking with her breath alone. And he didn't move. He let her choose. The kiss, when it came, was soft and imperfect. No ritual, no rhythm dot, just closeness. Her lips met his like language newly born, every movement unsure then certain. Her hand curled into his shirt, knuckles white. Her breath hitched, then deepened. His eyes fluttered closed. The world narrowed to this. Warmth, closeness. The feel of another will press gently to his own. He pulled back not far, just enough. To breathe. His forehead leaned against hers. Are you sure? He whispered. Her answer came without pause. I choose. Then softer, firmer, no longer breath, but vow. Not as your servant. As your mate. The word struck him like gravity. Made flesh. He had no word for the way it filled his chest, cracked something open inside him, and let light spill through. She watched him, her mouth still close enough that he could feel the hum of her next breath. I don't know how to be that, he said, voice low, shaking. But I'll lure with you. Her eyes flickered with something like laughter, or maybe wonder. You already are. She leaned into him again. No kiss this time. Just resting, skin to skin, forehead to shoulder. A silence filled not with what was missing, but what had been found. Beyond the blast doors, the jump gate flared like dawn, breaking in reverse. But neither moved. Not yet. Not until his hand found hers. Not until her fingers laced between his on their own. Not until the word mate stopped feeling strange and began to feel inevitable. The portal screamed open white gold light, spiraling into a storm at the center of the gate. Its howl was bone deep. Not sound but pressure, pulling at hair, skin, thought. Warning lights spun in every direction, slicing the air with jagged flashes like lightning trapped in metal veins. Jonah stood still, a storm in reverse raging behind him. Ahead, soldiers, uniforms, weapons raised, voices shouting commands they hadn't earned the right to give. His arm was outstretched, shielding her not out of chivalry, but reflex, instinct, devotion. Behind him, she breathed steadily now, no longer sedated, no longer broken. Her hand gripped the fabric of his coat with a steadiness that hadn't been possible just hours before. And her eyes weren't afraid. This isn't the end, he said. She didn't blink. Her voice was low, but it cut through the chaos like starlight through a crack. No, she said. It's the beginning of the name I've never had. Something in him fractured, not from pain, from awe. He turned toward her, and time slowed. The air between them hummed. Her skin was pale from recovery, but her fingers were warm now, and when he reached for her, she didn't hesitate. She took his hand like it was a promise. Like he was the promise. Their fingers locked, not with desperation, but with choice. Behind them, the soldiers shouted again, feet pounding metal. The gate flared hotter, the heat drawing tears to Jonah's eyes. But he didn't look back, he only looked at her. I don't know where it leads, he said. I do, she replied. Anywhere that isn't theirs. A siren screamed a last shrill cry. A warning or a threat, it didn't matter anymore. They stepped forward, one step, two, not rushed, not panicked. She leaned into his shoulder slightly, and he shifted to support her without thinking. Their rhythm matched like breath, sinking between two hearts, one human, one Trinari, but neither fully either anymore. Something new, something shared. The light rose to meet them, not harsh, not cruel. It bathed them in brilliance, soft at the edges like sunrise on water. The roar became silence as their steps crossed the threshold, and then they ran not away from anyone, but toward themselves, toward the unshaped, the uncommanded, toward a future with no designation, no collar, no permission, just a voice that belonged only to her, and a name she would learn to speak, syllable by syllable, beside someone who had never tried to shape her into anything but free. The air inside the gate caught them like breath held too long. Time stretched. Light peeled away the last threads of the world. Behind them, Jonah tightened his grip, not out of fear, out of knowing that whatever came next, it would be the first thing they'd ever chosen together, and the light took them, because they let it. The light on the fringe moon came in quiet, slanting through the half-open dome with the hush of early breath. It made the dust in the air glow faintly, like stardust suspended mid-fall. Everything felt softened here, like the world was whispering instead of speaking. Kael'riin knelt in front of him, her legs folded beneath her, toes bare against this cool floor. A small bowl of pigment sat beside her. Colors pooled like distant nebulae blue, silver, and a little smear of gold. She dipped the brush gently, not rushing. Not even thinking, it seemed. Just feeling. Jonah sat with his knees bent and arms resting across them, hands open, palms exposed to her like quiet offerings. They'd barely spoken for the last 10 minutes. Words would have felt too heavy. Her fingers, stained with flecks of color, steadied his wrist. Then the brush moved. A single stroke blue, curved gently along the crease beneath his thumb. She didn't explain. He didn't ask. The brush whispered against his skin again, this time trailing silver between the lifeline and the heartline. A deliberate pause. Then, a feather of shimmer across his knuckles, slow and curved, like the way she sometimes watched the stars. These, she said softly, not lifting her gaze, feel like choice. Jonah's breath caught. Not from surprise. He was used to her saying things that carved open spaces inside him, but from how gently she said it, as if she wasn't just painting, as if she was listening to his hands. She switched to her fingers. Then, smudging the edges of the colors with the pads of her thumb, blending them into his skin. Skin he hadn't even thought of as remarkable. Until her. The silence stretched again, not empty, just full in a way that didn't need to be filled. When she finally pulled back, her brows furrowed slightly, like she wasn't sure if she'd finished. Her gaze finally lifted, meeting his. There's no meaning, she murmured. No glyphs, just what I saw. He looked down at his hands. They shimmered softly in the pale light swirls of color with no pattern, but somehow perfect. Turned one palm up and whispered, "It feels like being seen." She didn't smile, but her fingers brushed the edge of his again, and she didn't pull away. The sky grumbled like an old story trying to be told again. Wind bent the grasses just beyond the glass, and the storm's breath fogged the corners of the window pane. Inside, it was warm. Soft amber light pooled from the hanging lamp above the kitchen nook. The tea steamed gently between them, untouched but not forgotten. Jonah sat with one leg tucked under him, elbows resting on the wood-grain table that Kael'riin had once called inefficient but charming. His hand cupped the mug like it might carry more than heat. She sat opposite, folding the edge of a shirt. Not one of hers. His. One she had washed without asking. Folded the way he liked, even though he'd never said it aloud. They hadn't kissed since the escape. Hadn't said love. But she hadn't slept in the other room in days. The silence between them wasn't absence. It was presence thick, with breath and unsaid things, music curling low in the corner. Not a song either of them knew. But it held. A rhythm they'd fallen into like shared gravity. Kael'riin finished the fold, fingers lingering at the collar, like she was memorizing texture. She set it down, not looking up, and asked quietly, "Do you miss the colony?" He exhaled through his nose, thought about all he'd left behind. All he hadn't. "No," he said, voice steady. "I only missed the moment before you looked away." Her breath caught, not sharp, just enough to make the air shift between them. Slowly, carefully, she raised her eyes. He didn't flinch. She didn't. Look away. Lightning flashed across the valley behind her. It lit the lines of her face soften now, not by design, but by peace she hadn't known she was allowed to have. He saw it every time she leaned into his laugh without stiffening. Every time her fingers brushed his arm when reaching for the kettle dot. No name had been given. No ritual. No confirmation. But it was there in tea for two in the way his coat ended. Up on her shoulders, and how her sigh slowed when their hands touched by accident and no one moved away. Her voice was quiet. "I'm still learning how to stay." His reply was even quieter. "So am I." And still neither of them looked away. The sky above their refuge was inked with stars, but no satellites. No signals. Just silence and dust and a horizon too wide for ownership. The world didn't know this place, didn't care. That made it perfect. Jonah stepped onto the porch with a mug in his hand, fingers curled loosely around the clay rim. The night was cooler than usual. The kind that made you pull a coat closer, not for warmth, but to feel something wrap around you. Kael'riin sat cross-legged in the grass, her back to him. The wind tugged gently at her hair, lifting strands like whispers trying to speak. She didn't turn when he approached, but she didn't need to. He knew she felt him. Her resonance always knew when he was close. She spoke softly. The galaxy still believes in chains. He didn't answer at first. He sat beside her instead, close but not quite touching, and handed her the second mug. She accepted it with both hands, warming her fingers. "They call it order," she said. He sipped, then exhaled. "Order's just fear with a collar on." "Hey." Small sound escaped her, not quite a laugh, more breath than voice. The kind of sound people forget how to make when they're watched all the time. Sometimes, when she wasn't looking, he watched her. Not the way others once did, evaluating for obedience or deviation, but like he was memorizing her every quiet motion. Like her stillness was sacred. She tilted her head toward him. "You could teach again, if we left." He looked out across the dark. No roads, no fences, no lights but the stars. "Only if I can teach you," he murmured. She turned, eyes searching his face in the dark. And then there it was, that smile. The one she only wore in the spaces where no one else could see. Small, unpracticed, real, freedom. She once told him wasn't loud. It didn't shout or wave banners. It was soft. It moved like steam from a shared cup. It curled between them in silence, wrapped around words like these. And tonight, it tasted like trust, the hum of the old generator. Was softer than usual tonight, like it too, had learned how to exhale. Jonah sat with his back to it, elbows resting on his knees, eyes lost in the sky. The stars above weren't sharp like on the inner worlds. They blurred slightly at the edges, like light seen through tears or memory. Kael'riin sat beside him, one leg tucked beneath her, hands resting idle in her lap, fingers dusted faintly with dirt from the day's planting. He hadn't meant to ask. The words had hovered in him all week, gentle, heavy, dangerous, and tonight they simply fell free. "If you were offered freedom again," he said softly, voice barely louder than the wind brushing across the grass, "would you still choose?" "And me?" There was no movement at first. No intake of breath, no visible shift of thought. She turned only slightly, her eyes lifted not to him, but to the sky, where a swollen moon had begun to rise, silver brushed with amber. "No," she said. His heart paused, just enough to ache. Then she looked at him, and the quiet between. Then changed. "I would choose us." She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her words landed like a heartbeat pressed to his chest. No explosion. No thunder. Just warmth deep and slow, like sunrise through an old window that never quite shut. He blinked once, and something inside him unknotted. Not because he was chosen, but because she was too. Because the choice was hers, and still she stayed. Not out of obedience. Not from rescue, but from a bond spoken in silence, grown in breath, tested in everything they hadn't said aloud. He shifted, leaned slightly closer, and she didn't move away. Their arms brushed. Not on purpose, but not by. Accident either. And for a while, they said nothing more. The generator thrummed low behind them. The stars did not judge. And the answer still echoed between them, not as a test, but as a mirror held gently in the dark, showing two souls and the truth they now carried. Together. The canvas above the doorway glowed faintly in the low evening. Light, a whirl of indigo and gold that shimmered like breath caught midder. Jonah stood beneath it, head tilted, eyes tracing the way the colors curved, not chaotic, but not controlled either. Like sound captured in motion. Like something alive had danced there with her hands. "What is it?" he asked. Kael'riin wiped. Her fingers on a cloth, dried streaks of paint across her palms. She didn't look at the painting. She looked at him. "It's the sound I felt when you first whispered my name." The words slid into his chest, like warmth settling after a storm. Not poetic, not rehearsed, just true. He crossed to her, reached out without asking, and tucked a stray curl behind her ear. She didn't flinch. She leaned into it, just slightly, like the motion was gravity instead of choice. They didn't whisper anymore. There were no rituals left between them, no steps to follow, no permissions to seek. She kissed him in the mornings before the sun rose. He wrapped his arms around her when the wind pressed hard against the roof. They spoke in half sentences and unfinished thoughts, and didn't mind when silence filled the rest. Their hands fit. Without adjustment now, Jonah walked to the window. The garden waited, dew still clinging to the leaves. The tools leaned lazily in the corner like they, too, had earned rest. Tomorrow, he murmured, but didn't finish. Kael'riin came up. Behind him, her arm sliding around his waist, her cheek against his shoulder. Let it come when it does. Outside, the wind moved slowly, like it didn't want to interrupt. They knew the galaxy might find them. The laws, the labels, the systems too big to argue with. But they didn't live waiting anymore. They lived here, between questions and answers. Between who they were told to be and who they chose to become. Got in a home with no walls, not in a love that didn't need to name itself. Jonah turned to her, and in the golden hush of their shared breath, nothing chased them. Nothing broke. They were no longer running. They had arrived. The console pinged low, a sound Jonah hadn't heard in nearly 3 years. Not since the day they crossed the edge of mapped space and made a life where no law dared follow. The message was clean, formal, a relic in its tone. You are invited to testify before the Interworld Senate regarding Protocol 27, specifically your former involvement with Subject 7-Beta. No threat. No summons. Just the kind of politeness that came wrapped in teeth. He stared at it, unmoving. Once, then again. Behind him, Kael'riin moved quietly barefoot on the old tile, dried herbs rustling like faint whispers as she tied them above the window frame. She always chose windows, always left them open, even when the air was sharp, even when it reminded her of confinement. She noticed the stillness before she saw the screen. Her steps paused, then approached, slow but unafraid. They want you to speak? She asked, voice calm but lined with understanding. He didn't look up. No, he said finally. They want me to remember. Silence hovered, not heavy, not cold, just waiting. Kael'riin stepped closer, hand brushing the back of his. No command, no ritual, just her. Will you say my name? She asked. Softly, the way you used to, if they ask. He turned to her, took her hand fully. His thumb traced the ridges of her knuckles, the scar by her wrist she never explained. There's no one else I'd say it to, he answered, and he meant it, not like a vow, not like a promise, but like a truth, carved gently into stone. Something that time couldn't wash out. Something that made the message on the screen seem smaller. Her grip tightened. Whatever the Senate wanted, whatever shadows still lingered in old protocols, they would find him speaking not for a subject, but for her, by name, as witness, as partner, as man who chose her once and would again, even now. The chamber loomed like a cathedral built from silence and polished judgment. Everything stone, steel, the shimmering light-filtered glass above seemed designed to dwarf those who entered. And yet, when Kael'riin stepped forward beside him, nothing felt taller. She wore no insignia, no mark of ownership or station. Just a deep green tunic, the threads kissed with gold near the seams, earth cotton, hand-dyed, folded in Trinari tradition. Her hair, once always tied or hidden by law, now flowed freely, catching faint whirls of sunlight from the chamber's skylight. Her scent moved with her saffron and salt. Memory and defiance. No one stopped her. Guards at the entrance had glanced, stiffened, but they hadn't raised a hand. Not this time. Not anymore. Jonah's steps echoed as they reached the podium. Kael'riin remained one pace behind, her presence steady, not shadowing him, but standing with him. Like wind at his back, he faced the rows of senators. Some human, some not. Their expressions unreadable behind their shimmer glass lenses. A mechanical tone invited him to speak. He didn't rush. Instead, he took a breath and found her reflection faint but certain in the polished surface before him. I'm not here, he said, voice clear, to speak of property, or protocol, or the systems that justified either. He let the pause stretch, not as challenge but as truth drawing breath. I'm here to speak of Kael'riin, not as a designation, not as a case file, but as the first of her kind to stand. Here without chains. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. She just breathed in slow, sure, unafraid. Jonah turned slightly, as if her breath anchored him. She is not my former subject. She is not a malfunction. She is my equal, my choice, and I am hers. The chamber didn't cheer, no applause, but something shifted. A silence too long held began to tremble. And Kael'riin, who once flinched at every noise, who once only spoke in rooms without doors, now stood in the center of power with her chin high, her heartbeat even, her gaze undimmed. For the first time, the world didn't recoil from her. Breath-dotted, exhaled back. Morning came soft through the shutters, casting warm lines across the wooden floor. The kind of light that didn't demand anything, just offered its quiet company. Jonah stirred to the sound of movement in the kitchen. A faint clink of ceramic, then silence. Suspicious silence. He found her at the counter, holding the last slice of bread like it was contraband. Her back was turned, but her shoulders stilled when she heard his step. "That was mine," he said, voice still rough with sleep. She didn't turn. "You snored," she said evenly, then added with a smirk, "so I took reparations." He laughed softly, the sound low and warm, and leaned against the doorway. She finally turned to face him, the crust in her hand like a trophy. There was color on her cheek from paint, maybe, or sleep. She didn't rush to wipe it. He watched her eat. She never rushed. She savored. Like each bite was a permission she granted herself now. A mug of tea waited for him, steeped just the way he liked. No ceremony. Just routine written in care. He caught her watching him when he sat down. She didn't look away. She never really did anymore. "You humming again?" she asked. "No," he lied. She smiled. "I like it." The coat she'd painted hung by the door, once gray, now streaked with swirls of gold and soft green. She'd never explained the design. He'd never asked. It felt like something only they needed to understand. That night, lying beneath the window where the stars didn't blink through the glass, but poured in like stories waiting to be told, she whispered, "I'm not their symbol." He didn't hesitate. "I know." He reached up, touched her cheek gently, thumb stroking over skin that once belonged to a registry. "You're mine." She kissed his forehead. No correction. No teasing, just breath. Because he didn't say it to claim her. He said it because it was already true. Because she let it be true. Because in the world they'd rewritten. Without contracts, without codes, without chains, she could be anything. And still, she chose to be his. The sunlight spilled over the marble steps like a blessing, each golden shard of it catching on the folds of Kael'riin's tunic and the soft fall of Jonah's coat. The air smelled of dust, new grass, and something faintly electric change. Maybe behind them, the Senate doors sealed with a hollow clang, and cameras buzzed like insects, chasing their retreat. But they didn't turn. They didn't flinch. Their steps were slow, steady, shared. Kael'riin leaned in slightly, just enough for her voice to fold beneath the wind. "Do I still smell like jasmine to you?" He stopped, just for a heartbeat. Just long enough to feel how the question reached. Deeper than scent. He turned to her, let his eyes linger. The way her hair caught the light. The way her fingers laced with his. Never tugging, never demanding, just there. Present. He smiled. Fully. That kind of smile he hadn't known how to shape before she existed in his mornings. "No," he said, soft and certain. "You smell like home." Her breath caught, not sharp, but soft, like remembering something gentle. She didn't answer with words. Just squeezed his hand once. Like punctuation. Like truth. And they kept walking. Not fugitives. Not evidence. Not proof. Just two people who had rewritten the world's language with touch and silence. And love that didn't ask permission.